Hi, this is Ann V. Brady, and I'll be reading an excerpt from my book, A New Beginning: The Story of My Adoption, Life, and Service, illustrated by Eric C. Brady. One day, I and two other medical assistants went to do a company wide drug screening. A trucking company had contracted our lab to collect urine samples from their employees. We drove to the company, and each employee went to collect their sample at different times. On the sheet for each sample was the date and time they gave the sample. As we were collecting the sheets, I noticed that there was a bunch of forms filled out with the same time of urine collection for the employees. One of the medical assistants handed out the forms and just wrote the same time for each urine sample for each employee. I pointed this out, and we had to stop the testing because it was tainted. The lab tech knew what the procedure was and didn't follow it. Each year, labs have to perform quarterly testing through an organization such as API, American Proficiency Institute Testing. The labs are sent to samples for the different tests that the lab performs: urinalysis, chemistry, etc. The laboratories are not allowed to discuss the testing or results they get with other labs, even if they're in the same company. I found out by accident that two of our lab techs compared results from a piece of equipment. I had to report it. Later that year, we found out the chemistry analyzer was recalled as defective. The lab tech I was having problems with sent the wrong specimen to our in house lab in Birmingham, Alabama. I received a phone call from the new lab director. I knew nothing about the specimen until he called me. He started asking questions, and I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He explained to me what happened. I told him I was sorry, that I would talk to the person who made the mistake and make sure it didn't happen again. He then demanded to know what my certification was. He informed me that he was an MLT. I told him I was an MT. He then told me that I would have to contact him before I had a lab meeting. I was told he was going to be at every lab meeting I held. I informed the assistant lab manager about what was going on. He told me that he would also attend the meetings. I found out later that year that one of the medical assistants was after my job and trying to get me into trouble. I thought it funny because he wasn't even certified as an MLT or MT. He couldn't take my job even if I quit. He complained about me to the manager of AFC in Montgomery every time he could. He wanted to get me fired and medical enlisted other medical assistants to help him. It did him no good and got him into trouble for reporting me for what he claimed I did. He didn't see me do what he reported me for. He reported me on hearsay. One day the manager came to me. He was going to interview a woman for a medical assistant position. He also wanted me to interview her and give him my opinion. After he interviewed her, he brought her to me for her next interview. He told me she was the manager of Waffle House, and she impressed him. I interviewed her. Things were looking good for a while. She told me that she graduated phlebotomy school. She said that she worked her way up to manager of Waffle House. I explained what her job would be if we hired her. She told me that performing labs was easy and a monkey could do it. She then said if she got the job, she would be working her way to my job as lab manager. She told me that she did that with every job she had. She told me once she became manager, she looked for the next job. I was stunned. She had insulted the intelligence of medical assistants in our clinics. She didn't realize she had to have, at a minimum, a certification of MLT to be a lab manager. I ended the interview and took her back to the manager of AFC. After she left, he asked me what I thought about hiring her. I told him, no, I don't think she should be hired. I told him what she said in the interview. He was shocked and agreed that he would keep looking for someone else to work in the lab. Ed and I finally decided to buy a house. We liked Prattville and wanted to stay. We picked Carol Lemon as our realtor to help us find a house. We told her we wanted a ranch house, 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, a garage, and a turnaround driveway. Carol Lemon took us to look at several houses, none of which we really liked. We were down to looking at 2 houses, one outside the city limits and one near the high school. We went to look at the house outside the city limits first. We followed Carol Lemon to the house. As we were following Carol, we noticed giant signs and crosses on both sides of the road. We also saw a small chapel on the right side of the road. The signs ranged from small to gigantic and were on posts of varying sizes. I asked Ed as we drove by, "Do we really want to live near here?" The signs posted things like, "You're going to hell," "It's hot in hell," "Repent and be saved." The signs were creepy. When we arrived at the house, we mentioned the signs and the crosses to Carol. We asked her what that was. She told us that it was the House of Crosses. She said it was a landmark and that the owner of the land had built it. People came from all over the country and the world to see it. We toured the house and loved it. We even talked to the owners of the house. I wasn't sure about the house. I wanted to look at the other house before deciding to buy. The biggest thing that I didn't like was that the house was overpowered with pink. The kitchen was painted pink below the wallpaper. The living room had white walls with a wood trim and bright hot pink below the trim. The wallpaper in the hallway bathroom had pink, flowery wallpaper. The sink for the master bedroom was in the master bedroom. The house had a garage and an office apartment attached to the garage. It had lots of land. We told Carol that we would let her know. We went home and discussed it. We both liked the house, but I felt we should at least look at the last house before deciding. Ed said that a friend told him that the house by the school had one problem. The sink for the master bathroom was in the master bedroom because the bathroom was too small. We called Carol Lemon and told her we would buy the house. In 1999, I joined the Women of the Moose, WOTM. I had made friends with a lot of the women members there. We enjoyed going there on Saturday nights for the occasional dance. Sometimes we and our friends would go to the local Waffle House for breakfast once the lodge closed up. When I had worked at AFC for a year, I was surprised when I didn't get an annual review. I waited and a month passed. I went to see the manager and asked about my annual review. He told me that the lab director had to give me my annual review. I told the manager to call the lab director about giving me my annual review. When I went home, I started looking for a new job. I really couldn't find anything, though. I kept seeing an ad for MAO looking to hire a lab manager. I wasn't interested because I didn't know what MAO was. I didn't know if it was a clinic, a business, a hospital, or laboratory. It suggested that I call the number and check it out. I called the number and talked to the head nurse of MAO. She was very pleasant. We set up an appointment for her to interview me. I found out from her that MAO stood for Medical AIDS Outreach of Alabama. It was a nonprofit AIDS clinic. I wore a pinstripe suit with a matching skirt and a white blouse. I originally bought the suit from Fredericks of Hollywood. They sold regular clothing as well as sexy clothing. I wore black heels. I wanted to look as professional as I could. I brought my resume, which I gave Kathy. She asked about my experience. I told her about my lab work in the military and my work at AFC. She described my duties if I was hired and explained what MAO did. MAO offered HIV testing for free and treated HIV and AIDS patients. Those that tested positive for HIV could seek patient care at MAO's clinic. They had 3 doctors and several LPNs and phlebotomists. They also had social workers who helped patients with different life problems. Finding resources to help with rent and food, they had a food bank for patients. The doctors treated patients for more than just HIV. They were treated for diabetes, high cholesterol, etc. I was offered the job and I accepted. I did tell Kathy that I would need to put in a 2 week notice at AFC. I turned in my 2 week notice. When the manager asked me why, I told him it was because I couldn't get my annual evaluation. The assistant manager told me he was sorry to see me go. He told me that he understood. The assistant manager and I stayed friends even after I left AFC. He also knew my husband as Ed worked on his home computer several times. I worked my 2 weeks and then started working for MAO in May 2000. First thing I had to do was prepare for a CLIA inspection. The prior lab manager hadn't kept up with updating paperwork for the inspection as he only came to work there once or twice before I was hired. He was working at a blood bank. The previous lab manager came to MAO to train me, which was a great help. I was caught up on all the paperwork from the time I started until I got to the CLIA questionnaire. I couldn't do anything about what occurred before I was hired. I logged everything, ran low, normal, and high controls for the hematology analyzer before running specimens. I cleaned the machines and did troubleshooting when there was a problem. I drew blood from patients, performed in-house performing performed in-house tests where I could. I sent a few samples for chemistries and other tests when needed. Samples that we didn't test in-house were sent to the state laboratory if the patient didn't have insurance. If the patient had insurance, we sent the labs to LabCorp. When the CLIA inspector came to inspect the lab, he gave me a hard time. He was upset that paperwork that was done before I worked for MAO wasn't filled out properly. I explained that I had been hired after that and there was nothing I could do about it. I had asked my trainer about all of that, and he explained that he only came in about once or twice a month before I was hired. He was angry about my explanation. He wrote me up, and I was given time to write what changes I would make to our SOP and to make other corrections that he suggested. I did everything that was required of me. 2 years later, even though I had improved things and was doing great, he still acted like I was a horrible lab worker. He would come in and be insulting and just plain nasty. I was happy the day he was replaced with another inspector. One thing that was done in the lab is that I would rotate delivering patients' samples to the state lab with MAO's phlebotomists. Even though we had moved from Cherry Lane Road, we would see our old neighbors at the Stanley Johnson Stadium. We would watch the Prattville High School football game with our neighbors in the steel bleachers. Oh. We also went trick-or-treating in the old neighborhood as the road we lived on was too busy to go trick-or-treating. Ed put up wallpaper to cover the pink in the living room. We removed the wallpaper from the boys' bathroom and painted the walls a royal blue. Eric attended Prattville High. He played the clarinet in the marching band. Mike joined the Webelos. Both boys became altar boys. Father asked Eric if he had been attending confirmation class at St. John's in Ozark. Eric told him yes. The director of the youth ministry came to Eric halfway through the year and told Eric he couldn't be confirmed. She told him he had to be a junior in high school before he could be confirmed. We fought it and won. Eric attended the youth ministry class and Mike joined catechism classes. I still occasionally called my brother Bob to see how he was doing, and I also called Uncle John to trade information on genealogy. My uncle sent me a clock that he had made. It's a wall clock with a pendulum. It hangs in our bedroom. At work, we received blood samples from a nonprofit clinic that tested their patients for HIV. I used a screening test for HIV-1. It was a round cartridge used for screening. It had positive control and the test. If you got one blue dot, you were negative for HIV-1. If you had two, you might be positive for HIV-1. If I got 2 dots on a patient's tube of blood, it was sent to the ADPH laboratory for Western blot test to confirm if the person had HIV-1. Most tests were negative, and rarely I would have a false positive. I performed urinalysis, hematology, pregnancy tests, fecal occult tests, cards, tested blood on a glucometer checking for diabetes, and drew patients' blood. I also drew blood when the phlebotomist went to lunch. By my second year, I was the hazard bio waste officer. I was in charge of annual training on handling hazardous bio waste. The company that collected our hazardous bio waste would send a lecturer to talk about hazardous bio waste, hazardous chemicals, how to dispose of sharps, needles, scalpels, in sharps containers. We were trained on what was considered hazardous bio waste. We were shown what forms to fill out, how to fill them out, and the procedure to follow in case of an accident. I'm going to end it there, and I hope everybody has a happy Tuesday. And thank you for listening to my reading of my book. You can buy it on Amazon.com. Search on Amazon for Ann V. Brady, and you'll find my books.